Thank you so much all for coming today. I'm very excited to introduce Dr. James Young and Denise Geiskkovitch to our presentations this morning for Breakfast at Sky. And to begin, we would like to acknowledge that we are on Turtle Island, and this is Treaty 1 land and the traditional territory of Dakota, Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, and the Denise people, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities and in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. So the topic of today's presentation is social robots for kids, the potential applications and opportunities. I'm excited that we are going to learn more about social robots, why they are made, and why they're made to look and act so lifelike, to understand some of the potential uses and impacts of social robots for working with children, and to learn about the applications for social robot research and education and health-related work with kids. So Dr. Jim Young is an associate professor in the Department of Computer Science at the University of Manitoba, where he founded the Human-Robot Interaction Group. Jim's work focuses on understanding how robots can use lifelike social interaction techniques to work with people and how these results can be applied to useful applications for working with people. And the co-presenter today is Denise Geiskkovitch. She's an interdisciplinary PhD candidate in the Department of Computer Science and Psychology. And Denise's research targets questions around how young children interact with social robots. So again, thank you both for agreeing to tell us all about your research today. And I will now turn the presentation over to you. Thank you so much.
Great. Great. Thank you very much for the wonderful introduction. I just saved a few minutes on my presentation. But more importantly, thank you everybody for coming out. I know that with Zoom and all the additional meetings and everything now that it's possible to go to many things, we end up going to many things. It's wonderful to see so many people making it out. Thank you for coming. So I'm just going to get started, and I'll be co-presenting with Denise, so we'll switch back and forth as we go along. So first, I want to introduce my lab a little bit, and it's important to recognize that a lot of the work that we'll show here, I do very little of the hands-on work anymore. It's my students and the student body, and you can see actually Denise in the picture here. But the Human-Robot Interaction Lab is a wonderful group of students. We typically have anywhere from 5 to 10 students at a time who are working very hard on these projects. So the work we are showing today is a group effort, and I want to make sure the students are recognized. So I'll start by talking about social robots. Now, it's really interesting because when I started this work area, social robots was a weird word that only academics use, but now I'll see it in the media, I'll see it in news articles. And so I thought I'd talk a little bit about what is a social robot and why we might want to make them. So a social robot, it's actually not too complicated, it's really simple. It's a robot that's designed to interact with us or to live with us as if it was a living thing, like a social being. So for example, it could be like a pet, or it might be human-like. And because of this, it might do things like act sad and use fake emotions to interact with you. It can use facial expressions, it can use gestures, anything that you might expect a person or an animal to do or use to communicate with you. These robots are designed to use those techniques. Now, one of the basic reasons why we might do that is that I can argue that it simplifies communication. You don't have to learn anything. For those of us who grew up at the age of learning to use a desktop computer, the generation that transitioned from no computers to desktop computers was a huge, huge expense. So robots, if they can use natural techniques to communicate with us, we don't have to learn how to interact with them. And it might save a lot of that work of learning how to work with robots. So yeah, social robots are lifelike and they use those techniques. But I guess there's still one question remaining of why are we doing this? If I pick up my smartphone, which is a pretty advanced computer, I don't really have much social interaction with that. I can speak to it now. It doesn't smile at me unless I install an app. It doesn't wave at me. So if we're not doing it with other computers, why would we do this with robots? Where does this come from? And it comes from the fact that a lot of research has now shown, both formally and informally, that when you have a machine that's in your space, that's physical, it can move around, not like a PC, right? You put a PC on a desk, it sits there. You put like a robotic vacuum cleaner in your room, it suddenly starts moving around in your space. and it's making some decisions like turn left, turn right, even simple decisions, but it looks a little bit intelligent. When that happens, when you have the physicality, when something's moving, part of your brain goes, hey, that's kind of alive. Now, people aren't stupid, right? We know it's not alive. We know it's a machine, but you get that reaction as if it was alive. And again, the research has shown very strongly that it's difficult for people to turn this off. So unlike a PC where we can install an app and you get a character, and yeah, I can buy into that. It's social. With a robot, it's the opposite. It's hard not to think of it as a living thing. So even something as simple as a vacuum in the middle picture here, once it starts moving around, people tend to, maybe some people give it names, or they tend to treat it a little more lifelike than they would with other appliances. So, I'm in the wrong window. There we go. It's basically a natural tendency for people to treat something physical moving as if it were alive. Okay, so we have this tendency. Therefore, social robots are designed to work within those tendencies. It's not the case that we make social robots with eyes and arms and then try to convince you to use social communication techniques. It's the other way around. It's moving around in your space, and so you have this tendency to treat it as it's alive. So the robots are just building on this, they're just leveraging this. It just kind of makes sense. Back to my smartphone, if I put arms and it waves at you, it's kind of weird. Okay, it's kind of cute. It doesn't really seem natural. When it's a robot, you make it an animal-like or human-like, it just kind of feels right. It makes sense. So it's a natural tendency that robots are leveraging. And I want to really hit this point of, are robots really that different than, say, a PC? And I would argue that the answer is yes. And I've been at this myself now for 15 years, and there's been, the community's a little bit older, but it is a fairly new field. And one of the things that happened to me as a student, and still happens today to my grad students, is they get surprised. You have this pattern where you come up with a research study or an idea, yeah, but it's just a robot, it won't work. And you get participants and they treat it like it's alive, and people go, huh, that's stronger than I expected. So it really is a strong effect. In the early days of the vacuum, a lot of people studied this. This is a Roomba, by the way, the happy face thing is a robotic vacuum. Some people studied how families adopted these robots, and it turns out that some people made clothes for their robot. That's kind of strange. Well, I should rephrase that. They made clothes for their vacuum cleaner, and it turned into a little industry. On the internet, you could order clothes for your vacuum cleaner. And there was a few studies, and I'll take a quote from one of them that came out that explains just how some families treated these robots. So here's a quote from a study. We did a non-warranty exchange, and it was emotionally, it's interesting that Spot, that's the name of the robot, was not actually just a robot. We had some real reservation knowing that we're going to send this one back to the company and we're going to get a different one back. Remember, this is a vacuum cleaner. But because it moves around, because it has that little intelligence, those quirks, we end up treating it a little differently. And this isn't just kids in a household. This has been observed in the US military quite strongly, where soldiers name their robots fine. They demand certain robots be repaired instead of replaced. They give them burials, they give them medals, and there's been several news articles about this and research studies. So even professional contexts like soldiers, it's just a natural thing to do to build that connection with these machines. So I've argued why we do social robots and how it's kind of like the natural thing and we're just leveraging that. But let's not forget that robots are also, they're fun, they're engaging because of that novelty effect. So here's a video I'll show quickly of one of my students, Stella. He entered this international robot art contest and he whipped up this prototype. So you see the robot over here. This is a snake robot he made. And what it does is people can walk up to it. They say, yeah, what's your favorite song? Oh, cool. My favorite song is, I don't know, Gangnam Style, whatever. And the robot will go, okay. And it plays that song, dances to it, and paints you an original painting based on the characteristics of the song. So just a toy, just kind of fun. But it was really, really engaging. So we didn't really do like a formal research study on this because it was just kind of like a side project of Stella. But the robot wore out in no time because of demands from the Faculty of Science in the university. Oh, bring the robot, bring the robot. Everyone loves it. It's very engaging. So in addition to all those social components that I talked about, it's actually quite useful to have something that garners that level of engagement. I wanted to show the done. There we go. So that's the quick rundown of why we do social robots. Oops, there we go. And here's an example of the picture. This is, I forget which song. I didn't know which song this was, but we have them all over our lab. Here's an example of one of the paintings that the robot made. So basically, I've made the argument, I've explained what social robots are and why we do that. They can be engaging, we can use natural language, we can use emotion. There's a lot of really good possibilities once we enter into that realm. So now we're going to shift a bit and talk a bit more about what we might be able to do with those robots. So now I'm going to mute, and Denise, you can take over.
Yeah, so we've now talked about what social robots are and what they can do or how we engage with them. But what can we actually do with this information? So we're currently actually working on robots that make people feel more comfortable and calm. And I'll show you now a video first, and then I'll talk about it, of a particular project that's spearheaded by an undergraduate student in our lab who created what she called the Snugglebot. So Snugglebot actually provides emotional support and companionship through its need to be hugged. It needs you to take care of it, to keep it warm. And of course, it's soft and cuddly and looks cute. So social robots can provide a range of unique forms of emotional support.
Next slide.
Yeah.
Okay.
You didn't see my sign. Anyways, so social robots can actually improve people's mood and comfort in a variety of situations, including in hospitals where patients of all ages, but including children, might have to undergo certain procedures or be there for medical testing. And they can also provide companionship. They can do this by providing companionship or an opportunity for distraction from whatever is going on around them. So we can also design robots to elicit empathy. So in this particular project that I'm going to talk about and show you, we worked with a local artist to create an empathy-inducing robot.
How's the weather today?
It's not too bad. It's pretty good. Yeah, it's pretty not too hot, not too cold, so I like it.
That's good. It's too bad I'm not allowed to go outside.
Yeah, that's too bad. Maybe one day, hopefully.
Maybe.
Okay.
So the robot here is able to elicit empathic responses and build rapport with people. And what we just showed you here is not even the empathy-inducing part of the experiment. It's just a small discussion that they had beforehand. So we found that people do empathize with these robots due to how they're designed and how they behave. Again, social robots are intended to be lifelike or similar to, humans or animals. So they're able to elicit and pull out those parts of our social being.
How's the weather?
So, for example, in terms of empathy and engagement, research suggests that social robots can actually use this empathy and engagement that they are able to get out of people to encourage children to complete rehabilitation exercises when they either may not want to or might feel a little shy about it. And in addition, they can also reduce children's perceptions of pain during vaccination. So you can easily have a social robot there to either comfort the child or even distract them from a potentially painful or uncomfortable situation. So what's next for emotional support robots? Well, there are actually very few studies in this area. So a lot of open questions remain in terms of what we can use emotional support robots for and how we can do so. So we're actually currently looking at using affordable and simple social robots to provide children with emotional support at home, doctor visits, or hospital stays, in the hope of being able to actually have these robots that children can actually take home or have with them. They're simple, they're affordable, and they can actually provide some sort of emotional support for children.
Great, thank you, Denise. So back to me here. So another approach we've been looking at with social robots is, in addition to the physical comfort, they can have conversations with people. Now, of course, we know that talking and having conversations can be very effective, but robots provide interesting angles that people can't provide. For example, a robot can be non-judgmental. If you have a child talking to a robot, and it's a sensitive topic, they're not afraid of being judged by the robot because it's just a robot. And we can ensure that the robot doesn't record, it's private, especially for older kids that would understand what that means. It's a private, shared experience opportunity without much risk. So it sounds great, let's just make robots that people can chat with. The problem is technology is not quite there yet. Robots are not capable of smooth conversation yet. Let me just show this quick video.
How old are you, Pepper? Hi. How old are you, Pepper? What? He's ignoring. How old are you, Pepper? Pepper, you like hockey? Pardon me? Pepper, do you like hockey? My favorite color is white. What?
So as seen in the video, despite how good our imaginations might be about interaction with a robot, it's voice recognition, conversational turn taking, understanding context, all of these things are extremely difficult problems which we've not made much headway on with voice communication. You might be thinking, well, I can have somewhat of a conversation with my phone or my home assistant, Siri, but the reality is those devices listen to you, train themselves on your voice over time. They use very expensive off-site processing, which again has privacy concerns. Robots don't have any of these things. Robots may need to have a walk up and use scenario where it can't train on you. And to make things worse, it's often trained for the average user. Up until recently, that was a North American male, right? There's studies showing that voice recognition assistants work better for men than women because there's more male training data on them. Yes, it wasn't just you, it's the machine. And it's even more complicated for kids. Kids speak differently. They have a different level of enunciation. They have a different type of syllabary. They use different words. If I show this picture of this robot again, you can see that the microphones are on the top of the head here. look at the child's height, right? So it's getting an echoed version of the voice and not the child's direct version. For all these reasons, voice recognition is awful. It doesn't work well. We don't have it yet. We shouldn't rely on it. So if I go back to this point that I made of, hey, let's just do conversation robots, cool. Now I've shown you that maybe it's not going to work as we envision. So what we've been doing in my group is we're trying to rethink conversation design. All right, we have this robot. Here are its real capabilities. What can we do that's actually going to work and not result in the video that I just showed you? So we came up with a few approaches, but we're still working on this. One idea is just focusing on simple questions. If we just ask simple questions and listen, you can emulate some of the properties of what you might see in some clinical psychology. Now, of course, we're not replacing psychologists with robots, but we've studied how to get people talking. And one of the strategies is to simply ask open-ended generic questions to get the person to talk. We can learn from that and maybe get robots to do the same kind of thing. If it just asks generic questions and to encourage the person to talk, we might be able to get some of this reflection. And then in this case, the robot doesn't really need to understand what's going on. It doesn't need to understand the nuance, the words. It just can nod its head and go, I see. Well, tell me a little bit more about that. And so we've been thinking about this. And of course, I know I mentioned, counseling. We're not making a counseling robot, leave that to the professionals, but we imagine we could have some of the similar functions at the base level at home or in a comfortable space, again, from the machine that's not judgmental. So here's an example of a prototype we're working on. This is a master's project by my student, Lorena. So she made this, oops, that's not the pause button. She made this prototype. The idea is you put it in your home somewhere. It's next to a chair. If you want to have a chat or want to sit down and just talk about your day, you just walk up to the robot and get it started. And that did not work. Let's try that again. There we go. So we made this, of course, to help with loneliness or to have someone to talk to. But we also focused on these other really important points: safety and privacy. It's not online. It doesn't record anything. It's not connected to the internet. It deletes everything as soon as you say it. There's no recording, no data privacy issues here. And also feasibility, as I just talked about. It's a conversation that we can implement, not some science fiction dream of what robots should be. And this pause is not working okay. I'll stop that now.
Hello, do you have some time to talk?
Sure.
Perfect. Let's talk.
Okay.
Has anything good or bad happened lately?
I made a chocolate cake on the weekend. It was really good.
Oh, and what do you think about that?
It was really interesting. I haven't made a chocolate cake like that before, but it actually turned out a lot better than I thought.
So I'm not going to show this whole video, but I want to highlight a few things. One, it's a humanoid robot. It looks like a person. And it moves. It looks at the person, tracks your face. It has those gestures. All of these things are linking back to the stuff earlier in the talk. We're trying to make it, we're designing to leverage and encourage that kind of social behavior to make it just feel more natural. Two, the robot didn't need to understand what the person was saying. It just gets them to talk. And hopefully through that process of talking, you can reflect a little bit or feel a little better. This is very early stages of this project. Right now, the student's finishing, Lorena, she's finishing her prototype, and we're actually going to apply for ethics to actually put this into homes. We have 5 of them, we'll put them into homes. It's early phases, so things will break, but hopefully we'll learn about what kinds of interactions work, what kinds didn't work, how people felt, and then how to build robots better to maybe have that kind of supportive conversation. So conversational robots, what's next? Basically, robots are fun. They're cute, they're engaging. We hope that with kids, this means they're less scary to talk to. We can imagine robots being used for emotional offloading. Talking about that was really painful. I want to talk about that. And maybe help someone help people process information of what just happened in a safe way. Like, yeah, that was kind of off, wasn't it? Right. And remember, this is not about replacing people. It's a complementary approach to what we already have. At no point will we suggest that a robot like this would replace a professional, but we also have a lot of time where someone, a child or even an adult, is sitting waiting, or maybe they could use a robot to talk to first or after. You can mix and match and envision that these things can be used in tandem with existing approaches. Also, I want to highlight that it's not about the robot, right? It's about the process of the person, the process of going through talking about something and having a listening. I mean, it's a robot, they know it's not a real person, but having someone listening, nodding along and reacting, it's about that process that we want to create. Great. Okay, and now back to Denise.
Yeah, so now I'm going to shift gears a little bit onto a different topic. And one of the most common tasks that robots do with kids is actually provide them with information. So a lot of robots are designed to maybe teach them math or other subjects, or potentially to explain a procedure or what might happen to them or how they might feel and things like that. So we're looking at various factors that may affect the delivery of this information. So how children are able to receive this information, how they perceive their robot, how they perceive the information, etc. So, and robots are built or designed to provide information to kids because they are engaging. They're good at providing information because children pay attention to them, oftentimes more than adults. Robots are novel, so they're able to elicit, as we showed before, empathy from children, and they're attention grabbing overall. And children do seem to treat them a bit like peers. So it's possible that a child might see a robot as being more like them than an adult. But for this to be able to work, for robots to be able to provide children with information, we need to figure out whether children actually trust the information coming from robots and listen to robots, and basically whether they follow the instructions or what they do or say. So through our research, we found that children tend to treat robots similarly to how they do people. So when a robot does make a mistake, or when it does make a mistake, it matters and it makes a difference and affects how children perceive that robot. So this suggests that we can potentially use these errors purposefully to increase or decrease trust as necessary. So we are potentially able to modify children's trust towards robots depending on whether we need them to trust a robot or whether maybe it's not the best idea for them to do so. You're muted, Jim.
Zoom bingo. Thanks, Denise, and apologies for the, apparently not only robots make mistakes, but choosing the next slide at the right time is difficult for humans as well. So that's, we went through some of our work and some of the work in the field, and I just want to end the talk and finish up by talking about some of the possibilities and applications, basically things we're thinking about and directions we're considering going in the next phases of this research. So robots can be used for rehabilitation. They can be used as emotional support. We can use them for play. Let's not underestimate the value of play, and even for talk, as we've talked about a little bit. But I'm going to go through each of them in a little bit more detail. In rehabilitation, you could imagine a robot, for example, guiding children through exercises. Now, because of all the things we've talked about, it's engaging, right? It externalizes the focus from the child, removes the focus from the child, and lets them focus on the robot. Because of that social connection, the child might feel more inclined to listen to the robot's instructions or to follow what the robot is doing, just a little bit of peer pressure. And on the positive side, you can even imagine a buddy mentality coming out of this, where hopefully a child could look forward to meeting Sam the robot or wherever on Tuesdays, because it's become their buddy. And we've actually You know, we can't show everything here, but there's actually really cool research showing how even teenagers create that buddy mentality and end up becoming a bit protective over their robots. For emotional support, we've talked about a lot, and I want to highlight that simply hugging something and keeping you company can be very beneficial. There's research showing how this can lower blood pressure, generally reduce anxiety. So we imagine that we could find more ways for these kinds of emotional support robots to help with that. In our case, because to make it not just a toy, we try to leverage this social connection a bit more directly by making robots that shows appreciation. When you pay attention to it, it shows it's happy. You know, you have to pay attention to it by design. You're encouraged to, I should say, but it gives back to you. It's happy, and it's happy that you've taken care of it. And again, here this can be useful for distracting and comforting. I'll mention this is actually something I thought about just this morning. I recently broke my foot, something awful, and while I was in the emergency room and they're resetting my bone for the third time, extremely painful experience. Only thing I remember is the pain and the nurse, and she was next to me and just talking nicely and, you know, reminding me to breathe, which somehow I had forgotten how to do. And at one point, just hold my hand, and I actually remember, wow, this is really working. Now, again, our emotional support robots are not going to replace these wonderful nurses, but it can offer some of that kind of support in perhaps a less traumatic scenario. It can distract people. It can comfort you. It can provide that little edge of niceness when you're doing something unpleasant. Especially with younger kids, play is something that robots can really help with because they're novel and they're fun and they're cool. If you have a very serious day with doctors and procedures, you could imagine a robot providing a very fun and interesting break. Play, as we know, can lower stress. And again, it can shift the focus away from the child toward the robot. They can focus on something new and forget about the troubles for a while or what they're currently going through. Talk is a big one that I think has potential if we can solve this problem that I've talked about of actually having a conversation that works. And we're working on that. I think talk can be used to encourage self-reflection, which is very beneficial. And it can also provide some calm, some understanding. It's non-judgmental, and all these things packaged into one. Now, back to where the talk started, this is different in my mind than a smartphone because of this physical presence. It's in your space, it's moving around. Our brains do treat it a little differently, and I think that's an easier in or an easier, a lower energy path, let's say, to getting kids to talk to this robot versus, say, a smartphone app. So in summary, summarizing the talk, I think if there's one thing we want everybody to get out of this is, you know, what social robots are, that's great, but also to consider social robots as tools. Robots are really unique in terms of technology. They provide all these really interesting opportunities for new ways to interact with people. Again, they're not replacing people, and I kind of keep bringing that up because it's commonly something that some researchers are trying to do. Oh, we can replace certain people with these robots. Well, I don't think that's the key here. When it comes to emotional support, we need people, but robots can be part of the toolkit that we can use alongside people to interact with kids and anybody really. But we're not really sure how this dynamic will work. This is an open research problem, and we need more research and more experimentation to find out what works, what doesn't work, more robot designs, throw them out there to see how people actually react to them. So that's the end of our talk. Again, thank you very much for coming. We have